Welcome to part 2 in our series of wedding photography videos. Part 1 was a kind of discussion of the months, weeks, and days leading up to the wedding. And if I could summarize that in one word, it would be communication. Really clear communication between you, the photographer, and your couple that you're photographing just about the day. Today, in this video, we are going to dive into the day itself. I just said day a bunch of times, but that's okay. Really talking about walking through a normal day. We're joined again by Christina Bernalis, who is a wedding photographer. I am often her assistant when she is shooting weddings, and so we're going to kind of do an interview style format similar to we did in the first one, and I'll be sharing some of my perspectives from an assistant from time to time. And so let's get started. So the first question is, it's the morning of the wedding, and kind of what are you doing to prepare?
Well, many things. I mean, a morning of a wedding is pretty much just like any other morning. What you want to make sure is that you eat a really good breakfast, because you're going to need a lot of energy throughout the day. You want to, well, what we do is we pack all our gear. By then, all of our batteries will have been charged or will be charged. So we just load them up on our cameras and our speed lights, and then we pack everything in our camera bags. We print a few things. The first thing is a checklist that has all of the pieces of gear that we need to take to each wedding, and we print one out for each wedding and check off, make sure that every item is checked off so that we don't forget anything. And I print out a timeline as well as a shot list for group portraits that we'll take during the day, during family portrait time, and anything else that I need to keep in mind throughout the day. So I'll constantly be referencing back to that sheet, and I'll give one to my assistant as well, so that he or she knows what the timeline is, and so that he or she can remind me of keep important things in mind as well. So
now we have talked about gear in the past. We've even shown a video where we showed the gear we shoot at a smaller wedding, but I think there's a lot of interest out there of what gear people shoot weddings with, and there is no one answer. Different photographers approach it differently, but maybe talk for a moment about the gear you use to shoot a wedding, and then I'll share what I shoot with.
Sure, yeah. So I have two full frame cameras that I bring with me. For most of the day, I'll have each of them on me, around my neck. One with a 85mm lens and one with a 35mm lens. And that second camera is also serves as a backup, so in case one of my cameras break, then I have another one. I have, as I said, an 85mm, a 35mm lens, a 70-200, and a 50mm lens, and then 5 speed lights that I bring with me, as well as plenty of memory cards and plenty of batteries, and a computer that we used to do a slideshow during the reception.
Nice. And I shoot with a full frame camera as well, with a 24-70 and a 70-200. And then I also know that we rent that, and we also usually rent a macro lens for ring shots and other detail shots.
Yeah, most
of the time.
Yeah.
Now that's really high-end gear, and there's a lot of folks out there who are starting out. What can you give them as some kind of recommendations for stuff that they should start with or be looking for in gear to shoot weddings with?
Well, I started out shooting with one of my favorite lenses when I was starting out was the Tamron 28-75, and I love that lens on my full frame camera. As well as my crop sensor camera when I had a crop sensor camera. So that's a pretty good all-around kind of walk-around lens. I would suggest that people who can't afford high-end gear try to rent it, just because you can budget that into your cost of shooting weddings to kind of justify it, and it allows you to kind of try out things before you buy them, so you don't go ahead and spend the full amount of money into buying a particular lens or a particular camera body, and you get to kind of try them out and see what you like best and what works best for you. So renting, I think, is a really great way to try out gear, and once you've determined what you like, then you can actually go ahead and buy it. But otherwise, if you don't want to rent and you want to know what to get that isn't a high-end lens, you can just get probably something to cover, wide-angle shots and then longer shots. So from 24-18 if you're in a crop sensor camera to 200, I think covers the whole spectrum of focal lengths that you might need on a wedding day. So, something like, it doesn't have to be necessarily these lenses, but just as an example, from 24 to 70 and then from 70 to 200. That covers pretty much the whole thing.
Yeah.
So.
Good. And I know some other good value lenses that we've talked about before. You mentioned the Tamron 28 to 75.
Yeah, I love that
It really is a really nice lens for the money. A prime lens like the 51.4.
Yep, I still shoot with that.
Yeah, that's a good lens.
Nice lens.
The lowest level 70 to 200, the 70 to 200 f4L lens.
Yep.
It retails for somewhere around $600-700, I think, and that gives you that range and very nice quality as well.
Yeah, and it's a nice lens, and it's pretty sharp, and the only times that you might run into an issue is when you're in a dark situation and you can't stop, or you can't go above 4, and you might want to fill it with a speed light or something. So, but it is a very nice lens and it's very good value. So.
I think that leads into the next question of you choose to shoot with primes. Can you talk a little bit about why and maybe how you handle the challenges that come with shooting with a prime lens?
Well, I don't always shoot with primes, but for the most part I do shoot with primes. The lens that I use the most throughout the day is the 85. And I've just kind of grown to love and grown really used to that focal length. So I've spent, the better part of, the last couple of years just kind of getting to know that lens and shooting with it. And I know what I'm going to get depending on where I'm standing in relation to my subject, what my frame is going to look like before I even put the camera up to my eye, because I just know that lens so well. So I think that shooting with primes definitely has its benefits. So you get really nice quality glass, and you can usually, they're pretty fast lenses, which means that you can shoot at very wide apertures, which means you can use more natural light, allow more light into the sensor. So that's kind of why I use them. And I also like to shoot pretty wide to begin with, just because I like the look of that. So, but I think
by wide you mean a shallow depth of field, wide aperture.
Yes, yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Not a wide focal length.
Oh, no, yeah, that's right. So wide aperture. And I think that if, for challenging situations, I've had very little issue just like having to back up. Like I can usually back up pretty easily. I do have, as I mentioned before, a 35 in my other camera, so if I do need to switch to a wide focal length, I'll just switch cameras. But for the most part, I've never had that problem. And if you were just starting out, then I would definitely recommend just playing around first with a zoom lens, and then, sort of slowly transitioning into a prime lens, and then kind of seeing how that goes. 50 is kind of nice. It's a nice, on a full frame, the 50 on a cropped sensor. Probably the 35.
35.
Right. A 35 would be nice. I think would be the equivalent to 50. Mm-hmm. So for somebody who's trying to get into primes or wants a pretty standard prime that isn't going to be too limiting, then the 35 on a crop sensor and the 50 on the full sensor.
I think the Sigma 30-1.4 is a nice value there as well.
Yeah, I don't really know much about that lens, but that sounds like a good focal length. Mm-hmm. Yeah, for a crop sensor.
So we've got all of this gear we just talked about. We've packed it all up into think tank bags. And I just want to take a moment and not necessarily give a shout out to Think Tank, but give a shout out to well-made bags. You've got really important, expensive gear that you're about to haul around with you all day. And I know I personally have tried going the cheap bag route before because, well, you've just spent a lot of money on lenses and there may not be a lot left over for bags. But it really is not a place to skimp. I have tried to skimp, as I was just mentioning there, and the bag was literally falling apart within just a few weeks. It's not only important for your gear to be protected, but all of it to have a clear home in the bag so you can stay organized throughout the day. There's a lot of switching lenses, looking for this flash or new batteries, and if you have a decent bag that's going to have compartments for all of that, I think you're going to be a lot better off.
Yeah. I mean, I think the thing to remember is that whenever you buy a bag, you're just kind of making an investment for the future. If you buy a cheap bag, you are more than likely just going to have to replace it sooner or later. So you'll still end up spending money. It'll just be incrementally over a period of time in smaller chunks. So it's better just to like buy something that you know is going to be reliable and you know it's going to last and you know you're not going to have to replace. My bag, the bag that I carry my wedding gear in, I take that traveling with me because it's made for travel as well, and I know it can fit on the overhead compartment. So it's just a really worthwhile investment for me, even though it wasn't necessarily the cheapest thing.
Great. The wedding begins, or the photography day for us begins when the bride and groom are starting to get ready. Can you kind of take us up to that point and through that?
Yeah, so we arrive about an hour before we begin shooting so that we can drop off gear at the reception site if we're able to make it there. So what I'll drop off there is usually an iMac that we'll do a slideshow on during the reception. And we'll also take some time to scout around for spots to do family pictures and then couple portraits. From then, we just head over to where the bride and groom are getting ready and we check in with them. We start shooting. At that time, it's since my assistant and I split off, and he or she goes to photograph the groomsmen while I stay with the bride. It's important for me to be really clear about where I would like to meet after we're done shooting, just so that we don't waste any time trying to hunt each other down. Especially here in Vermont, I oftentimes don't have cell phone service where I am because the locations are so far off the grid that that it's important to know that we should meet at this time at this place. So yeah.
Okay, now, so I know from my own experience that oftentimes the locations that the bride and groom are getting ready are very often small, poorly lit hotel rooms, or even if it's a room in the house, it's not a photography studio. So how do you get nice photos in these small, dark locations?
Well, you shoot tight, first of all. You don't have to capture like the whole room. Every single time that I walk into a room to photograph getting ready photos, everybody is like scrambling around trying to clean up things, and I'm just like, don't worry about it. I know how to shoot to, kind of hide that. So, and that's what I do. I shoot pretty tight. And, I will position people in better light when I need to. I will turn off lights in the room when I need to. And I usually, when I come in and I'm introducing myself to everybody, I will tell them what I'm going to do, how I'm going to shoot. And I say that, for the most part, I'm just going to be a fly on the wall. I'm not going to bother anybody. But if I need you to do something, I'll tell you. And if I need to turn lights, I'll turn off lights as long as that's okay with you. And I do ask before I do that. And I will position you in better light whenever I need to. So by then, when I actually start shooting, they know that, that I'm going to ask them to do something if I need them to. And it kind of avoids this whole really awkward part of the day when they're like, oh, what am I supposed to be doing right now? Am I supposed to be doing something? So they know that unless I tell them something, that they're doing what they're supposed to be doing. So yeah. So and again, just to reiterate, I will move people to a window if I need to, if there's better light there.
Now you mentioned turning off lights. Why are you turning off lights in the room?
Because the lights in these rooms will either be tungsten lights or fluorescent, so there will either be...
Tungsten is just your standard like light bulb, very yellow, very warm.
Very warm, but compared to a window light. Or, you'll have like fluorescent lights in some places, which are green, cast a green color in your photos. So if you have window light coming in and then you have either fluorescent or tungsten lights in your shot, then it's really difficult later.
You get this mixed lighting.
Yeah, you have a mixed lighting situation that's very, very challenging to correct in post-production. It takes a lot of time, and a lot of times it's not even really that possible to correct. So I will just get rid of the light source that I can control, and I'll move people towards the window, which is really flattering directional light. The other thing about lights inside rooms is that they're at awkward places where they hit people in the face. So they cast like really ugly shadows under the eyes and just weird shadows all over the face. So they're not ideal, so I just turn them off.
All right, so we've captured the getting ready photos, the key moments of the tightening of the tie and the putting on the jacket, bride getting the dress buttoned or zipped up in the back by all of the hands reaching in, kind of all of those classic photos.
Mm-hmm.
And then we're off to the ceremony site. And want to walk us through that next part of the day?
Yeah, so we arrive about half an hour before the ceremony starts, just so we can capture the emotions as they build up before the ceremony starts, and then guests as they arrive. This is a good opportunity also for me to come in and evaluate the lighting that I'll be working with. So if it's outdoors, what am I going to do if it's super sunny, or what am I going to do if it's like, just evaluating my light and kind of preparing for how I'm going to deal with it, and then telling my assistant how I'm going to deal with it so that he or she can sort of, deal with it in a similar way so that we get more consistent photos once we go to the edit. So I used to check in with officiants beforehand, and unless I've been told about certain restrictions beforehand, and I do ask this question in the questionnaire if there's any restrictions during the ceremony, I won't check in just because I know that I'm going to be I'm not obtrusive to begin with, and that's why I have a zoom lens so that I can shoot from far away, and most of the time when officiants have had a really bad experience or have something to say, it's because they've worked with a photographer that was very intrusive, and that's just not how I work. So unless they approach me, I won't go in and approach them. But yeah, and so then I also tell my assistant kind of the plan for the processional, so the entrance and the recessional, which is their exit, as well as where he or she should be during the ceremony. And one of the key things I think as a second shooter that I try to tell you to be aware of, and whenever I second shoot I try to be aware of as well, is to capture guests' emotions. So not just the parents reacting to the things that are happening during the ceremony, but also the guests, because they're really important too. The bride and groom have invited them to come and want to share this moment with them. So I think that being able to remember how they reacted and their expressions is also really nice. So I try to shoot that myself too when I'm not focused on the bride and groom, but it's really the job of the assistant, I think, to make sure that those shots are covered.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they're add a nice kind of story to the day.
Yeah.
Yep.
Absolutely.
Okay. All right, so let's say that the bride and groom have kissed, and you've absolutely captured that moment because that is a critical moment.
Mm-hmm.
And what happens next, typically?
Well, the bride and groom will make their exit, and then after that, if the ceremony is happening at a different place than the reception, then everybody will make their way to the reception site. And, if we're doing the portraits at the same place, the family portraits, which sometimes happen right after the ceremony, I usually tell the couple to exit and then hide so that they don't have an impromptu receiving line after the ceremony, unless they want one, in which case I will have known ahead of time. But the couple and their families and everybody who is going to be in photos will know where to be. And this again goes back to communicating before the day and letting them know and being aware of what their plans are so that we can kind of get started and get those out of the way. And so we'll pull our little list out with all the portraits and everybody's names, and we'll just go through them really quickly. Yeah. So, and then after that, we take some time with the bride and groom to shoot some portraits of the two of them. Sometimes I will, if we have a particularly nice sunset, I will grab them during dinner or before dinner, or whenever sunset's happening, check in with them and see if they want some sunset photos, because that's the most beautiful light of the day in my opinion. So it's always nice to take advantage of those portraits or that time of the day. But my priorities when it comes to shooting couple portraits is light. So I try to look for good directional light, open shade, and then background, making sure that the background showcases, the venue, or that it's pretty. And then once I have that all figured out, then my focus becomes, it turns into working with the bride and groom to get the most natural expressions and the most natural body language that I can get out of them, because I think that can really make or break a photo when couples are really stiff. So that's really what I spend most of my energy on, is working with them to get natural expressions.
Mm-hmm. And now I think for those who were wondering, did we just breeze over the kind of the topic of the whole family photos? We did cover that in the first wedding prep, and talking about having a really clear list of who you're going to photograph.
That's right.
And so go watch that one. We're not going to spend more time talking about that right now. From my standpoint, during the couples photography, occasionally you need me to hold a reflector. But more often than not, I'm probably shooting the cocktail hour at this time.
Right. That's what's nice about having two people cover the wedding, is that I do have that luxury of saying, we have really challenging lighting conditions right now. I need you to hold this reflector and help with that. And you should just go and photograph the cocktail hour and get some candid shots of guests, and then, get some detail photos as well. I always usually try to make sure that I get detail photos as well whenever I can, just because I have a particular vision of what they should look like, and I like to have them. But it's nice to know that I'll have them covered if there isn't any time. So that's why I really like to shoot with one other person.
So the kind of my three tasks, I would say, during cocktail hour, if I'm not helping with portraits, is details, candids of friends and family attending the wedding, and then slightly less candids, where maybe there's a group of people and I say, oh, would you like a photo? And everybody
Right.
always says yes. One of the things that, a tip for that is that I've learned that if you take just a few moments and reposition those people who have just agreed to a photo for better light, and not major, not walking them across the room or anything, but just simply turning them and saying, will you turn this way a little bit, then you're all evenly lit. You don't even necessarily need to explain it. Just say, oh, would you all turn just a little bit? The light's better. You just have to say better. And then that's a lot less post-processing.
For me, right.
Yeah, for you, working on the pictures. And it's just worthwhile. So really just take a moment when you look through that. Don't just bring up the camera to your eye and snap a photo. Look and see, is everybody evenly lit? Is somebody, also make sure you watch your aperture. Because sometimes you might be shooting at a really shallow depth of field and you have people that kind of glom onto the back of the photo, and suddenly you have a much greater depth that you need to account for there. And you just got to watch for those things.
Right, yep.
So portrait photography, the portraits of the couple has wrapped up, the cocktail hour is wrapping up, and dinner is starting. What are our roles during this period?
Well, so after the portraits, usually a couple will make a special entrance and they'll be announced. So I usually tell them to give me about 5 minutes to switch gears and be prepared for that. If they're entering right away, sometimes we'll just be done ahead of time and we'll just know when they're going to be announced and we'll have plenty of time. But so during this time, I'll usually give my assistant some memory cards to start downloading for the slideshow that we do. And we do this slideshow just as a surprise for the couple. We pick really the 30 or 40 best photos of the day really quickly, minor edits. I'll apply the preset that I apply to all of my photos, and then just some tiny, teeny tweaks, and then that's it. And it's just quick, and it's, again, I think the key is picking the best photos so that you don't have to edit too much, and the photos that have the most emotional impact and that are, going to really leave a lasting impression. The couples love it because they're not expecting that they're going to see their pictures the same day, and the guests really enjoy it too. They really love seeing the pictures, and so it's nice from that, but as an experience, from a sort of perspective. But it's also really nice for the venue coordinators to see the photos on the same day. I've had many of them that have really followed up with me about my pictures and have really grown fond of me because they've been able to see my pictures the day of. And I just think it has a much greater impact when you have them displayed there. the same day. So we take the time to do that, and I think that's a really great marketing strategy.
Let's talk a little bit about coverage during reception. You know, it's during the really kind of dinner eating part that the slideshow is getting put together. Not much is going on.
Right.
Although, again, having two shooters, one of us can be available to shoot moments, but
right.
we generally don't take pictures of people with food in their mouth.
Right. So we just say that, you know, in the questionnaire we ask if they'll feed us, and we'll tell them that we prefer to eat during the time that everybody else is eating dinner, so because it's just a slower time. And there's less photo opportunities, and sometimes we get to eat during dinner, but sometimes we don't. We just have to kind of stuff our faces in 5 minutes or less, and that's fine. But so during dinner, oftentimes the speeches will take, the toasts will take place, so you know, we'll be there. Or, you know, one of the other things that's nice is to really be in touch with either the coordinators, the venue coordinators, or the event coordinators, and with the DJs, because they'll know at what time everything will be happening. So they will let us know. Like, if we are eating in a different room, they'll come to us and say that, and tell us that the toasts are about to take place, so we should go over there, or the cake cutting, or the first dances, or things like that. So if we're not in the same room and we're able to know when those moments are happening, we'll have somebody tell us, and we'll be there for it. And then after that, after all of the highlights have sort of taken place and we have the slideshow put together, it's just sort of a free-for-all. You know, I'll set up 2 speed lights off camera. So the speed lights that I use have radio transmitters built into them, so I can set them up off camera. And that just kind of adds a nice rim light and a nice a little bit of extra depth to the photos, to the reception photos, which can be kind of boring, just one speed light. So yeah, so the only thing that I try to do is just stay out of my assistant's pictures, and vice versa, and try to, you know, crop him or her out of my pictures. And yeah, and we stay there long enough so that we can capture the spirit of it, but not so much of it that we're overwhelmed with photos that we have to call down and narrow down later, or, you know, that we end up giving the couple way too many pictures.
And I know that I think generally your packages are designed in such a way that the coverage is enough that you basically say that we will get your key moments, but we're not going to stay till 2 in the morning.
Right, so it's a little bit broad. And this is the first year that I've sort of am trying out that pricing structure, so we'll see how it goes. But the idea is that, you know, when it's 10 or 11 and at night, and we have a 2.5-hour drive home, and we've already shot an hour worth of dancing photos, that we're not just going to stay there for another hour and we're just standing around getting more and more pictures that we're not even going to use later on because we have to cull them down. So, you know, we just check in with the couple and we say, have we gotten everything? Are we forgetting anything? Is there anything else that you'd like us to capture? And if not, then we're off and we can head home. So the thing that happens also is that, you know, they'll usually pay for coverage for a certain number of hours, and then I feel like we haven't really gotten enough, and we'll have to stay like an extra hour, an extra 2 hours. So I end up doing that most of the time anyway, and then I don't bill them for it for whatever reason. So I just like bill for it ahead of time, and then if we have to stay, we stay. But it's also nice that, you know, we don't have to stay for 3 hours of just dancing and, you know, drunk people partying pictures. So you only want so many of those.
All right, and then we are packing up the car, and I know this is where the checklist comes back in
Our handy
use.
checklist.
A handy checklist. It's really nice to say this is everything we left the house with in the morning. Let's make sure we have it all back in the car, because during the course of the day, one, having bags that hold everything makes it a lot better, but stuff still gets moved around, and you just want to make sure you have that $1,000 lens back in your bag and you didn't leave it on a shelf in the reception hall. Things of that sort. So we have some reader questions, and one of them, I think it's a good question. Well, they're all good questions that we picked. We just got two. The other ones I've kind of written into the questions that I asked you over the course of this.
Okay.
What size cards do we shoot on? Do we shoot on gigantic cards so we don't have to switch during the day, or?
Well, I don't shoot on gigantic cards simply because I already own 16 gigabyte and 32 gigabyte sized cards. But I mean, if I didn't have any cards right now, I'd probably buy like at 64, probably 164, 264s, and that would cover me for most of the day, at least. I am not too concerned with cars corrupting or breaking. I can shoot backups. My 5D Mark III allows me to shoot backup to an SD card, so I'm covered that way. I shoot small RAWs to that card because that's the card that goes into the computer to do the slideshow. But even if I didn't have that backup, I wouldn't be too concerned. We shoot on SanDisk cards, and they're pretty tough. They're pretty reliable, and I'm not too worried about them being damaged. Well, yeah, of course. But unless you know, I do something specifically, like just soak it in water or something, nothing's going to happen. And we have pretty durable card wallets where we put all of our cards in that are waterproof and all that. So so I have 16 gig cards and 32 gig cards, and that allows me to, I end up with about 2 32 gig cards and 2 16 gig cards on an average day. So
okay. And I think one of the other kind of card related questions or tips is to switch cards at key moments, even if there's room still on it. And what I mean by that is you've taken all of the getting ready pictures, you've arrived at the ceremony site, your card might not be full, but when you have that few moments of downtime and you're kind of scouting around, go ahead and switch your card so that you don't fill it up in the middle of the ceremony.
Yeah.
Or you don't fill it up in the middle of speeches at dinner.
Or if you're, and that's another reason to shoot with bigger cards, because then you don't have to worry about that. But, you know, if you are, like, if it's during the ceremony and this is kind of a time where it's just downtime and you can switch, then switch before, like, the kiss is going to happen. Or switch before the vows. Or switch before, you know. So, yeah, so constantly be aware of how many shots you have left, because it's really easy to just not pay attention and then just kind of be out of luck.
So the other question is there a particular setting you put your camera on for shooting a wedding?
As far as shutter speed and aperture and ISO camera settings, no. No, I mean, you're never going to have the same conditions to work with, even on the same day. So, I mean, you are, you know, for like an hour maybe while you're shooting this and that. But I'm constantly just switching, and I shoot in manual mode. So, you know, sometimes if I'm like shooting getting ready photos and I'm shooting with the window in front of, you know, somebody's face, then my settings will be one thing, but then I'll have to turn around and shoot them backlit and my settings will be something completely different. So no, I mean, even from shot to shot, there's no one combination of settings that is going to, you know, be true for every situation. So I switch constantly, and I'm aware constantly of my meter, whether or not I'm exposing things correctly, and I watch to make sure that I don't overexpose things too much. So I'm usually about a stop overexposed in all of my photos. And the other thing that I do is I check the histogram to make sure that I'm not clipping any highlights or shadows. And so a combination of my meter and my histogram, and then the thing that I prioritize when I'm shooting is my aperture. So I usually will have my aperture set, and I'll change my ISO and my shutter speed accordingly to have my meter where I want it.
Thank you so much for watching all the way to the end. I know this was a big one, but I think it was filled with a lot of helpful information. If you have any comments or questions about anything that we've just covered, just leave a comment down below or over on Facebook. And if you haven't already, please subscribe. I really appreciate that. And thank you.